that the direction that we're going really could potentially break new ground in this whole issue that's a problem throughout the whole Northeast. And we could come together as a community to really put together more of an adaptive management strategy, ongoing community dialogue that we hope can really make a difference and help restore the forests. It's very exciting.
Now, if one wants to hunt deer, what do they use, a shotgun or?
In Westchester, it's bow only, so archery equipment only. Many other parts of the state, they can use a shotgun, they can use a rifle, a handgun, or a bow. You can use any legal implement during the regular season, but in Westchester County, what we call Wildlife Management Unit 3S, it's bow only. And they have the longest deer season in the state, excluding, actually Long Island has a late shotgun season where they can go into January. But other than that, we go to December 31st. And so they can hunt deer from the middle of October all the way to December 31st with the archery equipment.
Why bow hunting over?
Boy, I believe, that goes way back, and, it was probably a perception of safety more than anything because of urbanization in Westchester County, and, whoever it was that wrote those laws back in the day probably figured it was just safer to have archery equipment to do the harvesting.
In the county program, for example, the bow hunting is done from tree stands, so you're like shooting down, and so it really kind of limits the area that any potential arrow could go in.
People have to realize that archery equipment has a pretty limited effective range, and most hunters are taking shots that are probably around 20 yards. And when they're shooting out of a tree stand, even if you miss a deer at 20 yards, that arrow's not going more than 22, 23 yards, and it's going to stick in the ground. So it can be effective as a management tool, but it has a limited range, and that also makes it a little more safe on the landscape as well, although we would argue that any form of hunting is safe. When you look at the statistics, people that are injured in hunting accidents is far less. You're far less likely to get injured hunting or by a hunter than you are any other thing, and we can always argue about statistics and all that, but we would argue that hunting is safe, and especially bow hunting.
James, what are your thoughts on this?
I agree completely. I feel that hunting is definitely an option that needs to be explored, and I think the county's doing a great thing by opening up the parks and trying to explore the proper management techniques to get everybody together and try and save our forests, save pedestrians, motorists. And what was it? Matt Lauer was riding his bicycle in Long Island, and he rode his bicycle into a deer and flipped over.
That would be a shocker.
There's just so many different variables to living with deer that we have to, explore all the options and try and do our best to coexist.
So how does one qualify to hunt deer?
Well, in New York, they have to take a hunter safety course, and that stands true for any state in the United States. You're eligible at a certain age, and you can obtain a license after taking a hunting safety course. If you want to be a bow hunter in New York, you also have to take a bow hunter safety course, which is a pretty rigorous. It's usually at least 10 hours, if not multiple days, where we go through everything from hunter safety to hunter ethics to how to take care of a deer or track a deer that you've hit. And it goes through the whole gambit of what you have to do as a hunter and what to expect and all the safety issues involved. And then once they've accomplished that, they get a certificate, and then they can go buy a license. And you can buy either bow hunting and muzzle loading or your regular big game license, which is for the regular season. And there's different tags that are available for different seasons. In Westchester, though, because we want people to harvest deer, any of the tags that you get are good for deer of either sex and during that entire season. There is no difference between regular season and bow season in Westchester. It's all the regular season.
In Westchester, in the pilot parks program, the selected hunters have to go yet through an additional step of a qualifying test where they have to get so many arrows in a pretty small area, and they get one chance to do that.
Yeah.
That's it. James, have you run into any issues with hunting in Yorktown?
Not so much. I mean, we have had animals that appeared and deceased in people's yards, and there was no explanation other than a hunter that was probably in a place that they weren't supposed to be, and the animal, went into somebody's yard. But in terms of safety issues, we've, as far as I'm aware, we haven't had any serious incidents with, hunting, hunters and, public safety. hunting is permissible here in Yorktown as long as you have, permission from the property owner and you're within, the DEC's guidelines of, I believe it's 500 feet from a residence. As long as you're within the, the rules that are set forth, I think it's a great way of management, and it's more than a sport. In certain instances, it provides food for an extended period of time, and people may not be a big advocate of hunting, but at the same time, when you go to the local grocery store and you pick up a package of steaks, it's essentially the same thing. And I feel that it's a much better option in certain instances.
One interesting thing about the biology of deer, again, if the goal is better forestry, really, and better forests and biodiversity and nature protection, really, it's more beneficial to hunt does than bucks, whereas traditionally the hunters focused on bucks. So as we sort of develop really a new kind of hunter, the appreciation for what they're doing as a service to the community to regulate biodiversity ought to encourage them to remove more does, because one buck can inseminate a lot of females, but if you take a female out of the population, you definitely have cut the population.
Absolutely.
So really, again, it's like a whole new system we're developing.
It's a new mindset.
It's a whole new mindset, and the hunting is a very important tool, especially right now. But all these other tools of education and how we not only like manage our own backyards, but how we develop our communities at large. In other words, smart growth can include an element that will cut down on the amount of edge. In other words, remember I said early on in this discussion that it's really people that have caused deer to become overabundant because of the way we've developed our land. So there isn't any reason as we move in the future, we can't think about how we actually develop our subdivisions and how we develop our houses to minimize the amount of edge habitat, in other words, the amount of deer habitat. So really, hunting is, this new kind of hunting is going to be a tool. One will keep evolving and changing, but all these other kinds of activities are going to be necessary if we're really going to be able to manage deer and other species in a more sustainable way.
So is this such a thing as a deer forecast?
Absolutely. Every year, each of the regional biologists at DEC, the regional deer biologists, including myself, do a regional forecast where we look at each of our wildlife management units and we predict what the harvest is going to be and what the trends in the population are and what people expect to see. Mainly hunters look at these forecasts, I believe, but I'm sure other people look at them, and we give a prediction of what we expect to see on the landscape. Sure.
And
they can see that on our website, www.dec.gov, and look under, go to the section that talks about deer, and you'll find what the deer forecasts are.
And that will divide up the state in certain areas and say, in this area we're going to have 50,000 deer, and over here.
Well, we don't get into absolute numbers of deer, but we talk about trends in the population, and we talk about what the harvest is, because that's really how we monitor deer populations in New York State. Is by what that harvest is.
We have about 20 seconds left.
Uh-oh.
That's how fast it went. I'd like to thank my guests today. I have Dr. Fred Coons, from the Executive Director of Teatown Lake Reservation, Kevin Clark from Region 3 DC Wildlife Biologist, and James Waterhouse, who is the Animal Control Officer at the town of Yorktown. I'd like to thank you for coming on.
Our pleasure.
Went very fast. And I'd like to thank you for watching 30 Minutes, and have a good evening. Thank you.